Delawisi Victoria Labilawa Mizel, Gespegawagi Tleawi, Akwigi Listiguch. Nigan Bugui Wijuzik Construction at Wejibek Excavation. Bonjour et bienvenue aux délégués francophones.
Welcome to the delegates. We're very, very proud and we're very, very pleased to welcome you here today for our ceremony on the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangement.
And welcome to the endorsement ceremony for the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangement. My name is Victoria Labilawa. I'm from the Listigush First Nation, located in Gespegawagi, the 7th and largest district of Mi'kma'ki. I'm an entrepreneur. I own Wejibek Excavation and Wajuzuk Construction. I use these companies to promote Indigenous inclusion across construction projects and natural resource development on our traditional territory. I also serve as the Vice Chair of the National Indigenous Economic Development Board, and I am very honored to serve as your MC today for such an auspicious ceremony. I would also like to acknowledge that today's ceremony is taking place on the beautiful, unceded traditional territory of the Anishinaabe Algonquin people. We're going to start in a good way with Algonquin knowledge holder Claudette Commanda. I know many of you know Claudette. Let me say a few words about her. Claudette is an Algonquin Anishinaabe from the Kitigan Anishinaabe First Nation, and she has dedicated her career to promoting First Nations rights, history, and culture. She is the Executive Director for the First Nations Confederacy of Cultural Education Centers and has previously served on the Board of Governors for the First Nations University of Canada. She has served on the Kitigan-Zibi Band Council on 3 separate occasions. Claudette has dedicated the last 30 years to promoting First Nations people, history, culture, language, and traditional knowledge and rights in various capacities, including recently as serving as Elder in Residence for the Faculty of Law at the University of Ottawa and to the University of Ottawa Board of Governors. Claudette is a true ray of sunshine, and you know she brings joy and laughter to wherever she shares the space. Please join me in welcoming Claudette to the podium. Now, I know Minister Ng has provided a tobacco offering, and just to share with you a teaching on this offering, tobacco is one of our 4 sacred medicines that grows in abundance on our traditional territories, along with cedar, sweetgrass, and sage. When it is exchanged from the left hand, and it is passed to the left hand because your left hand is closer to your heart. Once lit, the smoke of the tobacco rises with our prayers, bringing with it to the Creator. Let us welcome Claudette Commanda to the podium. Ms. Sawinen. Our next agenda item will hear remarks from our invited guest. Our first speaker is Minister Ng. She is the Minister of International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development. The Honourable Mary Ng was first elected as Member of Parliament for Markham Thornhill in 2017. She has previously served as Minister of Small Business, Export Promotion and International Trade. Minister Ng is a devoted community leader who has always believed in the power of public service. She has 20 years of experience in the areas of education, women's leadership, job creation, and entrepreneurship. Minister Ng immigrated to Canada from Hong Kong with her family and grew up learning about the struggle and eventual success that many new immigrants experience in Canada. Her years working for the Ontario Public Service, Ryerson University, and the Ontario Ministry of Education led her to being recognized as one of Canada's top performing public sector leaders. She later served as the Director of Appointments for Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. Please join me in welcoming the Honourable Mary Ng.
Kwekwe, Ulakut, Tansi, hello, bonjour. Victoria, thank you very much for that kind introduction. And thank you to the Canadian Museum of History for this beautiful space that we're all in and for your support for this event. And to Elder Kamanda, as usual, thank you. Thank you for starting us in a good way with the blessing and with those words. And before we started, I also want to thank the elders for creating a circle also in a good way. I'm so pleased to be here with representatives from Indigenous organizations, elders, knowledge keepers, and Indigenous peoples from across Canada, both here in person, as well as those who are joining us online. I also want to welcome Tracy Hupapa, as well as Pita Tipin, two Maori leaders who are joining us here today, all the way from Otawawa, New Zealand. Kia ora. Let me also acknowledge that we are gathered on the traditional and unceded territory of the beautiful Anishinaabe Algonquin people. Pour tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes, incluant les immigrants.
For all Canadians, including immigrants to Canada, it's important to recognize that Aboriginal peoples have always been here and that we all have a role to play in reconciliation.
Just this morning, I had the wonderful opportunity to spend some time with members of the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Committee. We affectionately call them IPAC. Elders, representatives of the national Indigenous organizations, knowledge keepers, to really learn what more I and we could be doing together to advance economic reconciliation. I want to thank IPAC in particular for the wonderful gift, a truly important symbol of trade and collaboration and partnership. In that spirit of receiving that wonderful gift, a commitment for us to continue this journey for more partnership and more trade together. We're all gathered here to mark a milestone as Canada joins the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangement, affectionately known as IPETCA. But first, let me share with you a bit of the journey of how we all got here together. Indigenous peoples are the founders of trade in what was known as Canada, or what we know as Canada today. You are our first traders, our first entrepreneurs, and our first exporters. Today, we still rely on the foundations of your ancestors, of what was built. We have the responsibility to do more to ensure that Indigenous peoples reap the benefits of today's globalized trade. This is why, when the United States threatened to dismantle NAFTA and endanger the Canadian economy, an Indigenous working group was established at that time. And for the first time, we worked alongside Indigenous partners throughout the trade negotiations to defend our interests. With their help, Canada secured for the first time in our history an Indigenous Peoples General Exception in that free trade agreement, which we now call CUSMA, with the United States and with Mexico, that will protect the rights and interests of Indigenous people. When Indigenous peoples are alongside us in trade, at the table, and determine themselves what they need to succeed, we listen and we stand side by side with them. So when we, Canada, were negotiating to join IPETCA, we built on the work that we did together at the NAFTA renegotiations. And the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Committee, or IPAC, was formed. What they did was they reviewed those negotiating texts. And indeed, they shaped Canada's position and advised us every step of the way. This is the new way in Canada's trade policy, and it's consistent with our approach to enhance the relationship with Indigenous peoples and with UNDRIP. This is why and what IPETCA is all about. It's about the future. It's a future decided by Indigenous peoples for Indigenous peoples. Through IPETCA, Indigenous peoples will work with like-minded economies and their Indigenous businesses to share best practices and determine how they want to shape their economic growth and trade opportunities. We saw this yesterday. The Trade and Indigenous Peoples Policy Symposium brought together Indigenous businesses and trade promotion offices from like-minded economies in New Zealand, in Australia, in Chinese Taipei, and there were fruitful discussions on collaboration and on knowledge sharing. Now, I grew up with a Chinese proverb that says, "A journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step." And as we walk the path of reconciliation together, every single one of these steps forward matter. And I do believe that we're going to have more than 1,000 miles. And as minister responsible for both small business and international trade, I am committed to standing side by side with you as we work together to create more opportunities for Indigenous entrepreneurs to start up, to scale up, and to export your businesses into new customers in those markets around the world. But let me just share with you one such example of one extraordinary Indigenous entrepreneur here in Canada. And it's Nicole's story. She's the founder of Raven Reads Books. It's a company that sends curated subscription boxes of Indigenous authored books and giftware. Nicole, like so many young entrepreneurs, started her business in her basement. And there were 20 subscribers when she started. She recognized the value of reaching customers beyond Canada's borders and took advantage of the Trade Accelerator program. There, she learned how to make an export plan, receive valuable mentorship, accessed the network of Canadian trade commissioners who helped her reach those new markets. Let's fast forward to 2 years later. It's no more those 20 subscribers, because today it's 3,000 subscribers in 20 countries around the world. That's just one story. And if I had lots of time, and if people would permit me, I would do more of that, but I will stick to the schedule. Every Indigenous entrepreneur deserves the same opportunities and resources and reach the same success as Nicole. When consumers around the world think about the Canadian brand, I want them to think about the incredible Indigenous businesses, services, and products. I can think of Sataya Organics out of British Columbia. When they think about Canadian clothing, how about some of those Manitoba mucklucks, which are very warm, by the way. What about Canadian art? Let's think about the marvel creations of Inuit artists across this wonderful country. Et nous savons que ça serait de la
We all know that Aboriginal businesses and entrepreneurs will succeed, and we know it's not only the right thing to do, it's the intelligent thing to do.
1,000 Indigenous-owned businesses in Canada, and they contribute close to $30 billion to our economy each year. Let's just take Nicole's company as an example, who reinvested over $500,000. That's $500,000 into the Indigenous economy. The potential for growth is enormous. Canada is a trading nation at our core, and I look forward to continue to working with Indigenous communities, the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Committee, and our international partners to better support our incredible Indigenous entrepreneurs from coast to coast to coast. But I don't do this work alone. Some of you heard from Minister Miller yesterday. You will soon hear from my cabinet colleagues in Minister Haiju, as well as Minister Vandal, who is here. You're also going to hear from Parliamentary Secretary Baptiste, who also is the chair of Indigenous Caucus. And here, Jaime, I want to thank you for being a source of teaching, insight, lived experiences, and strong advocates for Indigenous communities all across Canada. As I look in the audience, I also work with some terrific colleagues. I have one here today in Member of Parliament, Leah Taylor-Roy. Hi, Tila, really great that you're here. Know that we all resolutely are committed to standing side by side with Indigenous peoples now and in the future. And I look forward to our continued journey along those thousands and thousands of miles together. Miigwech, Kuyanamik, merci, thank you, merci beaucoup.
Thank you, Madam Minister. Indeed, we are all walking that path to reconciliation. And I was thinking some of us are walking that path in moccasins and some are in high heels. Happy to be walking it together. Thank you also, Madam Minister, for the shout out to Nicole McLaren at Raven Reed subscription box. Nicole is just a rock star Indigenous woman entrepreneur, and she was actually featured last week, front page of Financial Post. So again, thank you for raising that profile. Our next speaker is Shirley Tolley. She's the women's representative for the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation Tribal Council, which is an elected position. Shirley is a proud member of the Kitigan-Zibi Anishinaabe community, located about an hour and a half north of us here in Ottawa. Shirley resides in the Gatineau area, in the heart of Algonquin unceded territory where her ancestors hunted, traveled, and traded along the majestic Kitchissippi River, and she happily goes back and forth from the city to her community because all of her family and friends still live there. She will readily admit that she has the best of both worlds in urban and community. Shirley retired from the Federal Public Service in 2013 from the First Nation and Inuit Health Branch of Health Canada. She has since worked with several Indigenous non-profit organizations in different capacities. Shirley is also a federal Indian Day School survivor, and she is also well-versed in cultural and traditional protocols. She considers herself an activist and was involved in many battles, especially when she served in the public service to improve Indigenous representation in the workforce. Today, she continues to work tirelessly to engage and advance the social and economic conditions of all women of the Algonquin Nation. Shirley's greatest success is being the mother and grandmother to her 3 children and 5 grandchildren, whom she's very proud of and spends most of her free time and energy with. Please welcome Shirley Tolley.
Okay, so I'm going to start off by saying Kwe kakina. Bonjour à tous.
Hello, everyone.
So I'm going to translate that for you, and it says, hello everyone, and thank you for being here today. On behalf of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation, tribal councils, chiefs, and our nation, I bring you greetings. Furthermore, as the women's political representative, I welcome you all to unceded Algonquin territory. I'd like to warmly acknowledge the sacred firekeeper, Elder Peter DeConti, and his helper, Sheldon McGregor, both from Kitigan-Zibi, for the beautiful ceremony that we shared this morning. I'd also like to acknowledge Knowledge Keeper Claudette Commanda from Kitigan-Zibi for her heartwarming and opening prayer. In addition, I wish to acknowledge Minister Mary Ning of International Trade, Export Promotion, Small Business and Economic Development, Minister Dan Van Daal of Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency, and shortly we'll hear from Minister Patty Hadju of Indigenous Services of Canada. I'd also like to acknowledge MINT, Jamie Baptiste, Parliamentary Secretary, and my other colleagues here that are joining me on stage this morning. I'd also like to mention the members of the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Council, Christina, Augustine, and Georgina Wainwright Kendrum. Miigwech for your hard work, Georgina, and Christina, in these negotiations. And I'd especially like to thank all the staff of Global Affairs Canada, who did an excellent job organizing and putting this event together for today. Okay, so after that, I say, okay, Indigenous economies have existed since time immemorial. We all must acknowledge that First Nations have been historically excluded from the domestic and trade economy. But now is the time to create opportunities and healthy communities. And we want to be part of the federation that were legislated out by the Indian Act. Where we are standing is, historically, the economic heart of the Algonquin Nation. We are also next to one of the traditional trading routes, the Kichisibi River. Excuse me. And we believe that the local is part of the new global. First Nations have the highest growing demographic in Canada. And as a result of this growth, we are left to wonder what we need to do in order to prepare our future generations. We must remain committed to a path of advancing economic reconciliation while significantly reducing the systemic economic gaps for the greater good of our nation and this country. We must work together to close the gaps which First Nations people face every day. Example, the infrastructure gap, 40 billion, the access to credit gap, 175 billion, and the export gap, 12 billion. These economic gaps significantly hinder our true potential. The Government of Canada and its endorsement of IPETCA must be a driving force to help our nation in areas where it can influence positive change on the existing systemic gaps. We wish to achieve greater economic values by improving our productivity and other business factors for developing trade strategies. Moving at the speed of business is a challenge for First Nations. Our entrepreneurs and business people are a prime example of our resiliency and our relentlessness to achieve our hopes and dreams. so as to lead the way for our future generations. The Algonquin Nation looks forward to cultivating and harvesting the fruit of IPETCA's labors. It is our hope that it helps our people economically in a way that attracts investment from our members and others to participate in the trade economy. We look forward to seeing a measure of progress towards reducing the systemic economic gaps so that our nation can continue to flourish and thrive. In closing, the Algonquin Nation is enthusiastic about the potential economic outcomes of the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangement. And in closing, I'd like to say miigwech for your time, and I'd like to say angwamsin, which means be careful, be careful, take good care. Miigwech.
Thank you, Shirley. Thank you for sharing with us and identifying these gaps, these persistent gaps that we've heard about, particularly in the areas of infrastructure, access to capital, and in export. We have our work cut out for us. I'm confident walking together on this path, we will begin addressing these. It is my pleasure to introduce our next speaker, Lisa Smith, the President of the Metis Nation of British Columbia. Lisa holds a Bachelor of Social Work with an Indigenous specialization from the University of Victoria and a Human Service Diploma from Vancouver Island University. She developed an understanding of the complexities of intergenerational trauma after working as a social worker in First Nation communities. Smith worked for the BC Ministry of Human Resources and as an alternate director for emergency social services for the city of Parksville. Lisa has served as a board member for the Métis Nation of British Columbia since 2007. She exercises her passion for governance and justice by sitting on numerous boards and committees. In 2010, her dedication to the Indigenous community was recognized when she was awarded the Queen's Diamond Jubilee Medal for her work with Indigenous veterans. As a mother, grandmother, and great-grandmother, Smith takes pride in her Métis family and heritage, and she also shared with me that when she travels, she really misses her dog, Dora. Please welcome President Lisa Smith to the podium.
Thank you so much. And thank you, everybody, Minister Ning, and to Claudette and Shirley for your words, and welcome to the Algonquin territory. We really appreciate that. I'd like to thank all our elders that are here today and acknowledge the territory that we're on today, the Algonquin people. So as you heard, my name is Lisa Dawn Smith, and I do have a dog named Dora. She is a toy schnauzer, so she's a little dog, but she's very vocal when I get home, believe me, but I do miss her when I'm on the road, so just something a little bit personal. So I am the president of the Métis Nation, British Columbia, and I traveled here from BC along with my colleague, Minister Louis Dieger, who's in the audience today, and he's our Minister of Economic Development and Health for Métis Nation, British Columbia. I just want to state that President Caron, our national president, the Métis National Council president, could not be here today, so I have the distinct pleasure of bringing greetings on behalf of the Métis National Council. So since 1983, the Métis National Council has been the national and international voice of Métis Nation within Canada. The opportunity to participate in this process and work together with Indigenous peoples around the world holds so much promise for the future of the Métis Nation. Sorry about that, I had some shadows on my notes, and I have very poor vision, so I'll hold up my speaking notes a bit. The Indigenous People Economic and Trade Cooperation Agreement holds the promise of greater collaboration amongst Indigenous people in the Asia-Pacific region to support our collective prosperity and well-being. I just want to acknowledge in the front row today, Louis and I had the honor of meeting some Indigenous delegates from Taiwan and from New Zealand, as well as a delegate from Australia. So it was a great honor to meet you all and to network with other Indigenous peoples. This arrangement also sets the table for future conversations among Indigenous peoples as to how we can utilize trade and investment to support our communities, families, and nations. It ensures that the interest of the Indigenous people will be the first thought and not an afterthought. As we all know, Indigenous people quite often are an afterthought. We want trade to be with Indigenous people to be a first thought. The IPETCA advances and reaffirms the self-determination of Indigenous peoples in their economic development and trade relations with other countries. IPETCA also reaffirms several important existing Indigenous-specific international instruments, such as the United Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, and acknowledges the important role of the environment in the economic, social, and cultural well-being of Indigenous peoples. The Métis National Council has worked diligently alongside Canada to ensure that these instruments are strengthened within Canadian law, and we look forward to working with Indigenous partners globally to support not only economic development, but also ensuring that these other priorities are met through this agreement. It is our sincere hope that through this arrangement, our continued work with Canada on co-developing economic strategies will address the specific needs of the Métis Nation. Having economic tools in place for Métis citizens, businesses, capital corporations, and governments will ensure that the Métis Nation can be a strong partner and ally to Indigenous people globally. The Métis have a strong history of entrepreneurship, and this is an incredible opportunity for us to share our knowledge and experience internationally. The Métis Nation and our National Council is excited to support this new agreement and will look to be an active partner in the international economic prosperity of all Indigenous peoples. We look forward to more countries joining the agreement and welcoming all Indigenous partners to this circle. So thank you very much. Tansai Kia Kiwao Chi Miigwech. Thank you.
Thank you, Lisa. And thank you for reminding us when we work together to support not only our families, but our communities and our nations. And thank you as well for reminding us of the importance of the continued work in co-development of economic strategies that will build prosperity for all of our peoples. Our next speaker, Dan Vandal, Minister of Northern Affairs and the Minister responsible for Prairies Economic Development Canada and the Minister responsible for the Canadian Northern Economic Development Agency. The Honourable Dan Vandal was first elected as a Member of Parliament for St. Boniface, St. Vital in 2015. He became the Minister of Northern Affairs in 2019. He is a proud Métis. Minister Vandal is a firm believer in giving back to his community. He has a long record of service in St. Boniface, where he served 5 terms as a Winnipeg City Councillor. At City Hall, he served as Deputy Mayor and was a tireless advocate for urban renewal and for better public spaces and vibrant neighborhoods across the city. He also helped develop Winnipeg's Aboriginal Youth Strategy, the first of its kind in Canada. Minister Vandal previously worked as a social worker at Winnipeg's Mamawi Wichi Itada Centre, an Indigenous family resource centre that delivers community-based programs and services. He was also chair of the Old St. Boniface Residents Association. From 2010 to 2013, he was the chair of the Board of Directors for the Aboriginal People's Television Network. And in 2013, he led this board through the CRTC license renewal process, culminating in a 5-year renewal for the network. Please join me in welcoming the Honourable Minister Vandal.
Whoa, I feel very high here. Bonjour, chers amis, invités distingués,
Hello, everyone. My dear
Tansi,
guest,
and hello. I want to start by expressing my thanks to the elders and the knowledge keepers that are here to set us on the right path this morning, and to the Algonquin Anishinaabe for sharing their traditional territory with us today. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. My thanks also to New Zealand, Australia, and Chinese Taipei, who joined Canada in pushing forward a shared vision and putting in place an innovative approach to working with Indigenous partners and concluding the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Agreement. Thanks to your efforts, Indigenous people throughout Asia Pacific region will be supported in their efforts to claim their rightful place in international commerce. I want to pay a special tribute to the many outstanding Indigenous leaders who have worked tirelessly to ensure this arrangement generates benefits for generations to come. Your commitment to collaboration and to reconciliation will change lives and change futures in communities across our expansive lands. This trade arrangement will create unprecedented opportunities for First Nation, for Inuit, and for Métis peoples to grow their economies and to build a stronger future by sharing knowledge and best practices and by increasing Indigenous peoples' participation in the economy and in trade. For instance, Nunavut fishers are testing new technologies and exploring the feasibility of identifying new species for commercial harvesting. This arrangement could foster the exports of fish harvest to markets globally, bringing prosperity to the fishing industry and to communities all across Nunavut. The lessons learned on the shores of the Arctic Ocean may now be shared with Indigenous fishers of other oceans to the benefit of the global Indigenous economy. Or Métis Crossing, a tourism development of the Métis Nation of Alberta that has delivered the unique culinary experience to move more than 1,800 domestic tourists. Imagine how these numbers will soar once international tourists become aware of such attractions because of this trade arrangement. Métis Crossing successes could serve as an international model for Indigenous tourism elsewhere. Initiatives like these are the products of collaborative efforts of First Nations, of Inuit, and of Métis, and the federal, territorial, and the provincial governments. These businesses provide essential revenue streams that create jobs in communities and foster more prosperous future for Indigenous communities in Canada, for Northerners, and for all Canadians. And they're just the tip of the iceberg. There are countless enterprising ventures run by tens of thousands of Indigenous businesses across Canada that now have a new global vehicle to share their offerings with consumers from across the globe. I welcome the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Agreement as a step forward towards the full participation of Indigenous nations and Indigenous peoples in global trade. First and foremost, because it respects the inherent right of Indigenous peoples. It respects the diversity of Indigenous worldviews, and it breathes life into our commitment to implementing the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. And secondly, because it advances Indigenous self-determination while protecting the environment and mitigating the impacts of climate change. I look forward to participating in and contributing to ongoing efforts to further progress in achieving our common goals of supporting Indigenous people's success and supporting Indigenous people's prosperity. Miigwech, Kuyanamik, merci beaucoup, Marcy, and thank you very much.
thank you.
Thank you, Minister Vandal, for your contributions and working towards economic reconciliation, reminding us of the diversity of worldviews across Indigenous populations and underlining the importance of Indigenous self-determination. It's my pleasure to announce our next speaker, which is virtual. Minister Patty Hajdu, Minister of Indigenous Services and the Minister responsible for Federal Economic Development Agency for Northern Ontario. The Honourable Patty Hajdu was first elected as a Member of Parliament for Thunder Bay, Superior North in 2015. She has previously served as the Minister of Health, Minister of Employment, Workforce Development and Labour, and the Minister of the Status of Women. Minister Hajdu is a strong advocate for women's rights, youth employment, and affordable housing. Before entering politics, Minister Hajdu was the Executive Director of Shelter House Thunder Bay and the co-author of the Thunder Bay Drug Strategy. She also previously worked in public health and focused on drug policy, youth development, and homelessness. I'd like everybody to turn your attention to our screens located on both sides of the stage, and we'll hear a message from the Honourable Patty Hajdu, Minister of Indigenous Services.
Kwekwe, Ulukut, Tanzi, hello, bonjour. I'm sorry that I can't be with you in person today, but I am well represented by my team and the excellent Deputy Minister. Thank you, as always, to the elders for beginning this ceremony in a good way. Your guidance and words of wisdom are so needed. We do the essential work of reconciliation and healing together. I'm joining you from the Robinson Superior Treaty Territory area in the traditional territory of the Anishinaabe and the Metis. And this is the area on the north side of Lake Superior, an area rich in history of Indigenous economic trade long before Europeans arrived on the shores of Turtle Island. Il s'agit d'un jalon important dans le partenariat international autochtone. Aujourd'hui, nous réaffirmons l'appui du Canada à l'accord de coopération économique et commerciale entre le peuple autochtone. Il s'agit du premier arrangement commercial international autochtone de ce type. Il s'agit d'une pas importante vers une économie plus inclusive et plus prospère. Et sa mise en œuvre soutiendra les entrepreneurs autochtones et fera progresser la réconciliation économique avec le peuple autochtone du Canada. This arrangement is the product of years of hard work, and I'm grateful to the Maori people and leaders in New Zealand who took the lead in proposing and drafting the arrangement. At its heart, this is working together and looking at trade through a new and also historic way. It's through the work and leadership of Maori, First Nations, Inuit, Metis, and Indigenous peoples across the Asia-Pacific that we're all here today. It is the ancient and time immemorial principle of relationships that Indigenous peoples have held up and continue to foster that gets us to this good place together. IPETCA, this new agreement, helps nations to work more efficiently and cooperatively and removes barriers to support Indigenous peoples to participate more fully in the global economy. As a federal minister of Indigenous Services, a key part of my work is to support First Nations, Inuit, and Métis communities and leaders here in Canada with their economic development projects. The government is listening and adapting our programs, policies, and tools to increase flexibility and support so that economic reconciliation can happen much more quickly. Recently, I attended the launch of the National Indigenous Economic Strategy here in Ottawa, and it's based on the key pillars of people, lands, infrastructure, and financing. It's an incredibly well thought out plan, and I know that this new roadmap will spur even more opportunities across the country and beyond. It provides a new way for economists, businesses, and financial leaders to imagine a new way of doing business that truly spurs on prosperity for everyone. And now, through the pathways forged by IPETCA, communities and businesses can reap the benefits that come from international trade, investments, and supply chains. The goal is to facilitate trade with, between, and among Indigenous peoples, opening up opportunities to the more than 50,000 Indigenous-owned businesses in Canada. This agreement will be a powerful tool for Indigenous entrepreneurs and business owners to gain critical access to capital and markets, including access to export financing so that businesses can expand beyond the borders of our country. And Indigenous peoples in member countries will also reap these same benefits. And together, we can make sure that the incredible Indigenous-owned businesses can reach new marketplaces and form new relationships. And this success is in part due to the incredible work and persistence of the Indigenous Peoples Advisory Committee. The committee had a front seat in negotiations, working with Indigenous experts from each nation state. The relationships that they've cultivated are really the foundation of the success of this agreement. I have great confidence this arrangement will spur new ways of working together and create opportunities and growth in ways that we can only imagine. The path forward is bright as we work with all partners to implement IPETCA, and I look forward to the exciting opportunities ahead. Miigwech, Kuyanamik, Marci, thank you, merci.
That wraps up our speaking portion of the agenda. Before we move on, I want to share some reflections on our day here yesterday. We had the wonderful benefit of a symposium that was held in the theater. We had the opportunity to hear from Indigenous entrepreneurs from across the world, speak about what their challenges were, but more importantly, speak about what IPETCA meant for their businesses and growing their businesses internationally. We heard a piece on governance, on the first task that will be carried out over the next year under IPETCA, which is the development of a partnership council, a joint partnership between government and Indigenous policymakers, where they will make decisions together, creating much needed transparency. And we know we are walking this path together. We also heard about what IPETCA means. It will help to increase the readiness of Indigenous people and entrepreneurs to participate in the international economy. It will help Indigenous entrepreneurs to enter export businesses, and it will contribute to structural change, much needed structural change, I might add. Within the arrangement, there were identified 22 areas of cooperation. We certainly do have our work cut out for us. We have a slight program change, so we're all very much aware of the hardworking members, our elected hardworking members of Parliament. So they have an important job to do. They have been called to vote. We are going to pause for about 4 minutes. I was promised. It should pass quickly. I invite you to please stay seated while our elected members will proceed to our green room to cast their important vote. But I'm asking you, while you are seated, that we continue this journey of economic reconciliation together. So while you are here, I invite you to introduce yourself and to learn something about somebody you have not previously met. It could be somebody sitting next to you, it could be somebody sitting behind you. But please, I invite you to stay here, and we will get started and resume our program as soon as our elected members return from the vote. Thank you.
I was wondering what was going on.
shows respect to the receiver of the gift, and it shows respect also to their family and to their ancestors. If we look out to the West Coast with our Indigenous brothers and sisters, with their tradition and ceremony of potlatch, potlatch is very much about reciprocity and the redistribution of wealth to make sure everybody has what they need to be successful, to be healthy, and to be happy, which are all basic tenets from the core of good governance for every society. Today's gift giving will begin with Minister Ng and Shirley Tolley. I invite you to both step forward. Minister Ng is presenting Shirley Tolley with a painting entitled The Eagle Dancer by Frank Polson.
It's as big
So
as
a little
me.
bit about
I
Frank
gotta
Polson.
make sure.
He is a painter and sculptor from the Long Point First Nation. He's a self-taught artist who produces works of unique beauty, as you see here. And for the last few years, he's really been developing his unique style working with acrylics. Frank's works capture his fond memories of seasons spent on the trap lines with his father. What a beauty.
This is so wonderful. Thank you, Kayla.
In our spirit of gift giving, I invite Minister Vandal and President Smith to step forward, please. Minister Vandal is presenting a drum made by artist Jamie Coble. She's Cree Métis from Lac La Biche, Alberta, and has lived in Ottawa since 2000. She's an Indigenous arts activator, activating stories and teachings of social, political, and cultural matters through Indigenous art. The drum is an important ceremonial tool to many First Nation, Inuit, and Métis traditions, used to facilitate healing, realignment of individuals' mental, spiritual, and physical and emotional health. The next segment of our agenda, we've been waiting for, is inviting to the stage Eagle River singers who hail from Barrier Lake and Kitigan-Zibi. I hear the jingle. We also have traditional dancer Awema. So from Kitigan-Zibi in our drum group and our singers, we have Burry. Give us a wave, Burry. And from Barrier Lake, we have Yancy and Steve. Give us a shout out. Whenever you're ready, Eagle River singers, take it away. Singers, wow, my heart is full. We stand so humble in this great hall, listening to our youth share their gifts, their gift of song, the gift of dance. We started with a ceremony, a smudging ceremony this morning with Elder Peter DeConti. We hear all of our Indigenous languages being spoken in here. Very humbling. We are very blessed. As we near the end of our program, I'm pleased to introduce Jaime Batiste, fellow Mi'kmaq, and Member of Parliament for Sydney, Victoria in Nova Scotia, and the Parliamentary Secretary to the Minister of Crown and Indigenous Relations. Jaime was first elected as a Member of Parliament for Sydney, Victoria in 2019. He is the first Mi'kmaq to be elected to Parliament. Mr. Batiste is a fluent Mi'kmaq speaker and was the first parliamentarian to speak Mi'kmaq in the House of Commons. Mr. Batiste previously held positions as a university professor, treaty education lead, and the Assembly of First Nations regional chief. Mr. Batiste holds a Juris Doctor from the Schulich School of Law at Dalhousie University and an undergraduate degree in Mi'kmaq Studies from Cape Breton University. Nige gedubipanim Jaime Batiste juguin nigantuk aganudumiwiay.
Aulo tioch, wel da si de gwe wil no gisguk. Galugna gwe gigimusi gizu pasipki wel da si aim gisguk. Good morning, everyone. It's an honor to be here with you. I always start off speaking the Mi'kmaq language as when I'm talking anywhere across the country. I grew up next to one of the traditional leaders of the Mi'kmaq Grand Council, and he always told me, whenever speaking to any audience, always start off speaking Mi'kmaq. And he gave me two reasons for this. And the first reason being that after 400 years, he wanted to show that our culture is still strong and vibrant and our language is still vibrant after 400 years of colonization. But also the second reason being that I was so pale, no one would believe I was Mi'kmaq otherwise. And so I've always thought about that, and I just really want to thank, they're not here, but they're in the backstage, the drum and the dancer there for that beautiful send-off. And as I was sitting here, I was thinking about looking at my notes and listening to all the speech, and I was taken back to a time before I was a member of Parliament and when I was an academic. And I agreed to be a part of an Aboriginal sustainability network that would work with the Maori from New Zealand, the Indigenous people from Australia, the Mi'kmaq of Canada, the Indigenous folks of Canada, Taipei, and what we did was we did an exchange of knowledge where they spent time in the Mi'kmaq community, and we went to go find moose, and we had a lobster dinner. We showed them different parts of our culture, and as an exchange, we went to Canada, Taipei, and went for 10 days all around, and was really not just in the cities, but absorbing the Indigenous cultures there. And I see Scott Simon, who is there with me, who's here today as a professor, and there he is, Scott, and I was having a deja vu moment while I was listening to the amazing things that we were talking about today, and the amazing things that were moving forward. And I remember that vision of a dream, and that's thought to myself that we all had as academics then, that what if Indigenous peoples from all across the world were able to exchange their knowledge, exchange what they valued. What if we set up a trade system to make this happen? And by listening today, I'm just like taken from that dream back in 2007, exploring different parts and exploring different cultures and hearing different songs and hearing different customs and hearing the importance of different resources to different Indigenous people, and thinking today, that's what this is about. This is a great moment where taking back from what we were trying to do more than a decade ago, I'd say 15 years, and saying being an academic then, but being an MP now, it's an amazing thing. And so when I got up here, I had my notes, and I was like, I don't know if I can't go with the speaking notes. So I just kind of speak from the heart and saying, that's what we really think. I think IPETCA integrates Indigenous ways of knowing and being, and supporting economic, social, and environmental well-being in the long term. This is not only about making profits, of course, but also protecting the lands and the waters and the resources. In Canada, we continue finding ways to strengthen and support more than 50,000 Indigenous-owned businesses. And if we can look at Indigenous businesses all across the world and say, how can we support each other? I think that's the great things that we're doing here today. And we've heard in the past 2 days from the Indigenous experts and leaders, and ensuring Indigenous people have access to all of these benefits and opportunities that flow from international trade and investment that has positive impacts for all. And that's why I'm happy to be here. I'm happy because we can see a future that's very bright for Indigenous people when we work together. And we're looking forward to see the outcomes of IPETCA implementation. Walalio, thank you very much, and it's been an honor to be here. Thank you.
Thank you, Walaliok. Walaliok, on behalf of everybody, we thank you. I have shivers up the back of my head. Thank you for sharing that. We're at the end of our program this morning. A very important element. I will be inviting our elders up to share closing prayers with us. This concludes the endorsement ceremony for the Indigenous Peoples Economic and Trade Cooperation Arrangement. I would like to remind our ministers, our leaders, and our elders and our performers that we'll be taking a few photos, we call family photos here on the stage, before we move into our press conference. Elder Peter DeConti has kept the smudging open, and he will do that until after the press conference concludes. On behalf of our hosts, the Government of Canada and the Museum of History, I say thank you to all who have traveled from near and far to join this celebration. We wish you safe travels back to your families, to your communities, and your nations. In Mi'kmaq, we do not say goodbye. We say, until we see you again. Walalio. Thank you.